slides and pictures. I have to show you crap-based history. But, oh, you see what I mean. But what party would be, eventually would evolve around Hamilton's ideas?
Conservative.
So that's the essence of conservative economics today, but the name of the party. I've heard like 25 different top parties. Did anyone say Federalist and I did not hear it? Thank you, Federalist. Did you say Federalist too?
Sure, I said it.
Yeah, I did. We all did. And what party was around Jefferson? Jefferson and Madison. Republicans. Now, you see the textbooks will be called Democratic Republicans. Have you noticed that? They didn't call themselves that. They called themselves Republicans. But future historians will start calling them Democratic Republicans to not confuse them with the Republicans that were formed in 1854 and in a lot of ways be the roots of the Republican Party today.
So the Democratic Republicans are Republicans?
No, that differentiates them.
Oh, okay.
The Republicans of Jefferson would eventually evolve into the democracy than the Democratic Party. I know.
So the Republicans.
Yeah, it's the Federalists. It's not a straight line from Federalists to Republicans today, but it's closer. All right, so that's Hamiltonian economics, and now we have Washington's administration, and with that we have some pictures. So, name one Elvis song.
Okay, help on the love.
Give us your best.
I was thinking
Somewhere in my photos, there's a picture of me acting like Elvis in the Sun Record studios because they had the microphone for it, his first recording. And I was acting like Elvis. I don't know, yeah.
So we got
Very badly. So, with that, as you can see, I don't have the slides up. Yeah, well, actually, that's a Carl Perkins song, but Elvis sang. This guy's saying it. That's Elvis. Done cash. There he is.
This messenger was in love.
So, the Federalist Era. Before we've already talked about the Federalist Era, so this is something you've already written down, but who's this guy? Jefferson? Madison?
Hamilton.
Adams?
Hamilton.
That's obviously a portrait of Washington drawn from another portrait. And he didn't smile a lot for lots of reasons. He was aloof, his teeth hurt, but
what is he doing?
all right. So as you can tell from this, easy to follow. I know you want to see a diagram from 40 years ago about Hamilton's financial program. So this sums it up pretty good. See, they're doing something here, and then I guess giving money. Then we have a bank, and then it goes over to build bricks, and then he's robbing a man without a shirt. And that pretty much sums up Hamiltonian economics. That's the whiskey tax. Thus, the Whiskey Rebellion. And now you're nuts. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1894. And this was in Western Pennsylvania. These are small farmers upset about it, upset about the taxes, and they saw we are following our legacy of the American Revolutionary War and Chase's rebellion. But I found this picture of the Whiskey Rebellion because it's pretty funny. It implies that there was a big fight, they have a cannon here, and there's a guy bandaged with a stick, and it wasn't like that at all. They did harass, maybe rob up a little bit, a couple tax collectors, but that was about it. But now, the new Constitution, the president has power. This is the president's proclamation. This is actually it, telling those people in Western Pennsylvania, you must obey the law. And then Washington personally led militia, more soldiers in the militia than he led at Yorktown, the last battle of the Revolutionary War. Then most were ill-trained, but they had weapons. Alexander Hamilton. Well, actually, he led it. That's Washington leading them. That's actually a painting. That's not a picture. Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, put on his old Revolutionary War uniform and was his adjutant. You know, it says Commander-in-Chief, so Washington assumed he's going to lead the army. And they marched towards Western Pennsylvania. There was no fighting. They basically just, once they realized that the militia is coming with that many men, the rebellion ended. But it showed a couple of things. And the big one it showed is this. The United States now is a strong central government. And they have the power to enforce their laws. That could also be a negative down the road, too. But they have that power. The big weakness of the Articles, they couldn't enforce their laws. Now we have that strong central government. And that's why I'm always amused when people today say that, I hear people all the time say the Constitution was meant to be a weak form of government. No. And this proves it right there. Yeah. That's the proclamation from Washington telling the farmers they're going to have to obey the law, pay the tax. It's just a president's proclamation. And one more thing. So can you imagine today? Going to war, President Trump on a horse, leading the troops to victory, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, behind him on the victory. Yeah, he's the only one. He's the only one to lead troops as president. I mean, technically, the commander-in-chief is commander-in-chief. But, yeah.
Like directly, like.
But they were actually weren't in combat, but he led them on a campaign, yeah. And so, I imagine you all have different versions and feelings about Trump leading the troops.
Yeah.
I just find it amusing, the whole idea. So, I know what else you're thinking. Where is my crab-based history? Here it is. Chester the Crab, who ended the Whiskey Rebellion. Yeah. Most of your best historians are blue crabs. Everyone knows that. And so, I mean, crabs. I mean, they got these things. So, as you can see, that's Hamilton. He's pouring corn out of a whiskey jug. I think they missed a step there in the production of whiskey. The corn has got to be mushed and then distilled. And to make a long story short, Washington rides off in the sunset. Okay, so I will have more crab-based history later on. Why do you think I have you draw the Go to Liberty? So you can draw the Go to Liberty's version of history. You're welcome. It's my service to you while this is going on. Europe is a flank. Now, this is the war that was triggered by the French Revolution. But to the American point of view, to the point of view of the United States, it was a war between Britain and France. Even though in reality, it was everybody in Europe fighting France. And this painting signifies the beginning of the French Revolution. What building is this?
The castle.
It's the Bastille. That they would take down brick by brick. So if you go there looking for the Bastille, you'd be very disappointed. It's now a big square in Paris. It's marked out where it was, but they're. Yeah, it was a fortification, but they turned it into a prison. And it was in Bastille Square where I saw the thousands of naked roller skaters. Okay, so with this, didn't I tell you that story?
No.
Yeah, my first night in Paris, jet lag. My wife and I were staying right at Bastille Square. We bought this little cafe outside. We're sitting there, kind of tired. You know, it's night. And we're eating, and also we heard this noise and kind of this commotion. And also these people, we could see them coming, you know, like just like this mob of people roller skating down the street. And it got closer and we realized they're not wearing clothes. And it wasn't like 3 or 5, it was hundreds and hundreds. And it went on for probably a half an hour of naked roller skating. Yeah.
One of my friends went to Hawaii. We went to see his brother when he was there.
But there are new beaches too. Go to the D-Day beaches. Okay, so that's actually one of the big thing about this one is that the French were doing quite well in this war. But what you have to get about this one, this divided the Federalists and the Republicans. This Anglo-French war. And the big thing is that since the French were doing well on the land, there's no decisive victory. And both sides decided to hurt the economy of the other side. And that's how the United States got involved. American merchants were trying to trade with both Britain and France. So you can imagine the British and the French were trying to stop that trade. And this was going on. So we have all these other issues, and then war, and the United States is going to be involved. Washington tried to declare neutrality, and that's his neutrality proclamation. We are out of this war. We're not going to get involved. And Washington knew he couldn't get involved, especially because the French were our allies, but they had a revolution that was really complex. We didn't want to fight the British.
And the U.S.
We both had no army or no navy. Well, the British were doing a blockade of France. I put it in the wrong order. They were stopping ships before they went into French harbors, including American ships, and they were confiscating the cargo. They said it was going to be used by the war effort. They just stole the cargo. And they were confiscating the crew. That's another story for a little later on. The French could not blockade Britain. So what they used, remember that term privateers? The pirates who would be used by states? Well, the French pirates were called corsairs. And so French corsairs were stopping ships, including American ships, on the way to Britain. Actually, the corsairs were stopping anybody, but on the way to Britain. So U.S. ships are being stopped. American commerce is being hurt. And remember, the U.S. had a horrific economy before the Constitution, and it's still a pretty shaky, weak country. Washington did not want war for obvious reasons, so he tried to negotiate with both the British and the French. The French, it went nowhere for lots of reasons. Partially, the terror was going on. Do you know what the terror was? Yes. Yeah. And I'm about to say not random people. Yeah, it kind of was random people. But the French were basically going through this. The revolution turned in, just devolved into bloodshed. And what were they using? The weapon? Guillotine. Without the weapon, but the national razor, yeah, the guillotine. And so they did negotiate a treaty with the British. We're not going to go into details of the treaty. That's not as important. A couple things about the Great Lakes and ships. The British, it favored the British, but the Republicans said it was very pro-British. The Republicans, this new party, remember we mentioned them once before, followers of Jefferson, they're attacking the treaty. That's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay. And Washington had the Chief Justice negotiate that treaty, which seems absolutely impossible today to imagine the Chief Justice negotiating a treaty, but it was unclear still at that time. And he didn't trust Jefferson. Jefferson was too pro-French. Who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court today?
Anthony Kennedy. No, John. Roberts.
John Roberts, exactly. John Roberts. Anthony Kennedy's an associate.
Yeah, right.
And if you did not know John Roberts or any members of the Supreme Court, once again, now it's time to know these things. Just tell me, now it's time to know. Or somebody who does know things like this and has information will use that to manipulate you and control you, and tell you how to think. People like me. Right?
You can start your own form.
Kind of this class in a way, if anything. Just wait.
I mean, you are filming.
Oh no! All we need is storyboarding. We'll get the whole plot line. We got red peppers. Okay. So, followers of Jefferson were so angry they began to burn Jay's body in effigy. So I love that picture. That shows you how fast it just went from being disagreement to anger. Wars do that. And here's the thing. So now you got followers of Jefferson, the Secretary of State, the author of the Declaration of Independence, called Republicans more and more. And they're saying that the Federalists, John Jay, George Washington, who he negotiated a treaty for, they're now pro-British.
What was the treaty?
It was a treaty with Britain. It doesn't deal with trade. We're not going to go into all the details of it. But the Republicans went nuts. They began to call on that Washington, perhaps, maybe he wanted the British to win. Maybe he wants to bring the British back. Maybe he wants to make himself king, or bring back a king, which by definition is treason. So they were calling Washington a traitor. Think how fast it took. How rancorous it became. Fortunately, we don't have that kind of political rancor today. Everybody's friends, but back then, actually, it doesn't compare. And there were duels being fought. We'll get to duels. So, when Washington did leave office, still no negotiation with the French, a lot of political rancor, he would set the precedent and give a farewell address. This is actually his handwritten farewell address. He didn't actually give a speech, they just basically gave like a pamphlet out. And in it, he warned of two things. Watch out for foreign entanglements. Watch out for war. War is divisive and leads to tyranny. And that will be proven in about 4 years. And also, beware of political parties. Washington, who frankly never really understood a lot of the issues that divided the two, but still saw how angry they got. And he thought, we just work together. Now the problem was there's disagreements. He didn't quite understand that part about it, but he understood the rancor when George Washington's being called a traitor. And he left really kind of a broken man and died very soon afterwards. Well, this is supposed to be the edifice of the state, this political cartoon. And on one side is a Federalist, on one side is a Republican, and they're ripping apart in anger, and the edifice will come down, and that's liberty and independence. This was the golden age of political cartoons that we can't understand. And that's supposed to be Washington now in the clouds warning them with a big nose, and I'm not sure what this is either. Probably clouds. It's supposed to be clouds or grapes or a large intestine or
Space nobody came down.
I've never seen. Too old. Actually, no, I've never seen The Lion King.
What?
No! It's not real, it's a cartoon. I only deal in reality, like Chester the Crab. No, I've never seen The Lion King.
You've never lived.
I've been alive a long time, so to speak. Okay, political parties. So what we have are true, unplanned, Madison still trying to, they had these ideas what would happen to political parties. And before we write this down, you notice there are only two. Winner take all, two parties. That's what we're stuck with winner take all. Because third parties will take votes away from one of the two parties, so there are two parties. And it's happened in a number of elections. So there's only been a few times where a new party would rise up, like the Republicans did in 1854, but they didn't then have three parties, just the Whig Party went away. And that's the last time that's happened. Now, third parties can have an effect, but they take away votes from somebody. It's almost certain this year that the Libertarian and the Green Party took away votes from Clinton and probably cost her the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Not almost certainly, that's what happened. Yeah, they're really conservative, but a lot of people, a lot of libertarians, at least in most states, it appears like they weren't going to vote for Trump, but they couldn't, for whatever reason, vote for Clinton, and so they voted Libertarian. In Montana, libertarians always take away votes from Republicans. So, let's get to where they are. These are some of the characteristics. And you're getting a sectional issue. Now, of course, not everybody living in the Northeast, in New England, are going to be Federalists. And the same for the South and the West. But it's that divide. And the West, we're talking the Wild West of Kentucky and Tennessee. Which, I got to be clear, I guess Tennessee really was crazy. I guess the definition of wild. And that's who made it up. But you notice I put down the word egalitarian. Actually, that goes with two things. First off, this makes sense for Hamilton, right? But you notice, remember Madison was saying, we don't want parties, he kind of feared the mob, and now the common man. That's Madison's party too. Madison started to realize, I need those people to stop Hamilton. So it's a little bit duplicitous, but anybody know what egalitarian means? Yeah. Not quite equal, not just right. Actually, it's more class-based. So like more equality between the classes. That's egalitarian. You're on the right track, but it's classes. So the idea of egalitarian is not too much power in the hands of the upper class. So the classes are closer together. And we have a pretty class-based society, so that fits in today. And where's it at? Okay, that's it. Oh, what building is that? That's the capital. 1800.
Without the wings.
Oh, and it's not there anymore. It's going to be burnt. Yes.
Can you say again what the parties are close to today? Like what parties?
The Republicans are closer to the roots of the Democrats today. And the Federalists are closer to the Republicans today. But it's not at all a straight line. Because today, the Democrats are more northeast and urban, you know.
Right.
So there's been a lot of change in the country, but the philosophy is closer. Next, urban role and industry, finance, agrarian. I think they fit together. Agrarian means what?
Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture, farming. It didn't mean that they were opposed to industry or we're not going to have food. It didn't quite mean that, but it's emphasis. We're talking now government aid. Government has immense ability to help or hurt different types of industry, to promote, to subsidize. Next, same deal. If you're going to be industry, you want tariff. If you're farmers, you got to buy stuff, so they're anti-tariff. And then strong central government and loose interpretation of the Constitution go together. These loose interpretation, those are the implied powers. Strong central government. Here, you don't want a strong central government? States. And strict interpretation, that's enumerated powers. But you notice I put asterisks. The Federalists were all for a strong central government when they're in charge of the central government. What happens when the Republicans take charge of the central government?
They want the stronger state.
Yeah, so that will fly. Jefferson talked a good show about power to the states, but as soon as he became president, in fact, he continued to talk about it. But the Federalists feared that mob more and more. Ironically, if you remember Federalist number 10, Madison began to believe we need more average people voting to keep power out of these merchants and those mercenaries of Hamilton. And so they want suffrage for people. And more, voting for representatives will become the American definition of democracy, even though it's not a democracy. And lastly, more and more, the Federalists look at it as Britain will keep things stable and avoid the revolutionary dangers of France, the radicalness of France. Well, to the Republicans, the French are standing up for liberty. And Jefferson's thinking, that's my revolution. They're following my declaration. Even during the Terror, Jefferson still supported it. And even when Napoleon had clearly made it into no longer a republic of liberty, but an empire, Jefferson still supported it. So, those are the parties. Two-party state, and see, that's the thing. You look at that, they can agree on some things, but there are clearly different ideas of which direction the country should go, just as we have it today. And so, industry, finance, and tariff, it's hard to negotiate with that. And so the idea is let's all get along and come together. People still say that to this day. There are different points of view. I have a radically different point of view than other people. And I'm not going to give up my attitude, and others won't either, just as Jefferson and Hamilton would. That's why we're going to have the first contested election in American history. Adams. Adams is a Federalist. Jefferson a Republican. Old friends who are going to become bitter enemies for a while. And I love this one. This one is supposed to represent like the Federalists carrying on Washington's ideas. That's supposed to be Washington. We're behind Washington, even though Washington was not a Federalist. And if you look carefully, there's Jefferson trying to stop the wheels. The wheels of progress. And then look at the ad. This was a flyer for the Republicans. And look what they call the Federalists. Tories, the Loyalists, traitors. That's how rancorous it got. Going back to 76. The problem was this. Every elector had 2 votes. So they voted for 2. Whoever won the most votes, president. Second most, vice president. And they had 2 votes. What if they have 2 different parties? That was not the plan. Madison thought it might be 5 or 6 people who put their name into a hat, so to speak, and then they vote for him. Well, that's how it turned out. There's split delegates for all these states, but the number's right here. Adams, 71. Jefferson, 68. Close election. And then you have all these other people who actually were thrown in to be vice president and probably voted for Washington again. Do you see the problem? Most of the Federalists voted for Pinckney to be the vice president, but not enough. So who's vice president? Jefferson. The leader of the opposition is the vice president. What a major flaw. And Jefferson is going to bitterly attack them while vice president. So that would be like, we have President Trump, and who would be vice president? And the Senate had, the vice president has had to break a couple ties in the Senate already. And very few things were voted for, but these were appointees. And the Vice President Pence, of course, voted for the Trump nominee, but it's unimaginable. And so this is already a crisis, and you think this is bad, 1800 will nearly destroy the country. So here is another easy to follow picture of the Federalists versus Republicans. And I only put this up for one reason. These are the Federalists, these are the Republicans. I'm not really sure what any of these mean, except for it appears as though the Federalists wanted to have all the balloons of the Capitol on strings. Pretty fun. Well, the issue with France continued. The U.S. never made a deal with France. And what we're coming to is the XYZ affair, which is a bribery affair. What happens is this. The U.S. representatives, a guy named Elbridge Gerry, but just the U.S. representatives, he wanted to see Foreign Minister Talleyrand. But before he could see him, 4 of his aides, intermediaries, demanded something from the U.S. And what they demanded, a number of things, but most importantly, they demanded a loan. Meaning a what? A bribe. They wanted a bribe to see Foreign Minister Talleyrand. So the U.S. would not be allowed to see Talleyrand unless they paid a bribe. Now this was appalling. How dare they? By the way, look at this picture. Who's this? That was Lady Columbia. And that represented the United States all the way into the 20th century. People that go, Uncle Sam? No. Lady Columbia up until like literally right before World War I. And feathers representing what? Which American Indians represented?
Freedom.
Well, liberty. But yeah. And these are the French bribing Lady Columbia, and there's Talleyrand. So we can't make a deal with the French. Here's the big deal about this. Why this became so important. The Republicans heard about this. And they started to bitterly criticize the Federalists. How dare you? How dare you try to demand a bribe? And why aren't you doing something about this bribe? And so the Federalists said, well, yes, there's 4 French intermediaries, WXYZ. They dropped the W, XYZ. They demanded a bribe, but we will not pay tribute to anybody. And because the Federalists were so bitterly criticized because of this, they went to war. And actually, it's not a war. This is what it is. The United States said, President Adams said, from now on, U.S. naval ships will escort merchant ships to stop pirates. Sounds like a war, but it's undeclared. So they called it the quasi-war or the quasi-war. Both pronunciations work. So it's not quite a war. Quasi means not quite. It's undeclared. And this might be my favorite cartoon because here's the WXYZ, the 4-headed French monster. To make it look more exotic and Eastern, they always put them in turbans back then. That's supposed to be the Americans wanted to see him. That's Talleyrand at this table of a bunch of libertarian or the French sans-culottes. That is a slave. And what they're talking about there is a slave rebellion in Haiti, which we will get to. And then They represent French liberty as they draw as an old hag. And what is she operating? You see the headless? That is one gruesome and great picture. So, originally I was going to have a couple choices for you to dress up with for dress up in December. I think the four-headed who agrees? To graduate, you must dress us out for a semester. Okay. Well, what happened is this. Before we get to the naval battle, we didn't have a Navy. See, it's really good to announce you're going to escort ships, but if you have nothing to escort them, it's really kind of a hollow threat. So we had to create a Navy. So Congress voted for and created a new cabinet-level department, the Department of the Navy, which would go on until 1947. At that Department of Navy, we need more money, so we had to collect taxes. And these are some of the ships they built. That's the Constellation. That's Constitution fighting a French ship. And amazing ships, fast, strong, well-built. During the War of 1812, so many cannonballs bounced off the sides of the Constitution. It's called old iron sides, even though it's made of oak. And the Constitution is still in the United States Navy today. That ship they built back in 1798. So as a Navy crew, it's at Boston. You can tour the ship, and I toured it, and the chief petty officer was my tour guide. If you ever get a chance, go see it. It is awesome.
It's the same ship?
Yeah, same ship.
No.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
So it was called
Constitution. The Constellation is this ship, and they actually rebuilt most of it to have just the hull. It's not still in the Navy, but you can visit that in Baltimore. So, the last major naval battles in the U.S. was in. The Constitution was there, a sailing vessel. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
So, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, the Constitution shelled the shores of Iraq. A ship from 1798. Okay, so, first off, Iraq has no shores. So no, it didn't. I was just going to say who would write that down. Okay, but it still really is in the U.S. Navy. So what happened was this: the Republicans were furious, absolutely furious. How dare Adams go to war without a declaration? And more they started to call them Tories and traitors, and they want to bring in a king. Adams started to be called a monarchist, and Jefferson was a red-headed, slave-holding revolutionary. And so they began to, they got really bitter. And the Republicans continually attacked, and the Federalists are like, wait a second, we're at war, and if you attack the government in war, you're helping the enemy. And they would pass one of the most controversial laws in history, actually 3 laws that we lump together as the Alien and Sedition Acts. So that's the actual law right there. You can take it home if you want. But the law had 3 parts, and I'm going to tell you one before the bell rang. A lot of people were immigrating to the United States. It took them 5 years to become a citizen. They increased it to 14. They made it more difficult to become a citizen. Which should sound familiar. The reason they did it then is because they would probably become Republicans. So they didn't want more Republicans. So they claimed it was because of the war, but in reality, it was to hurt the Republican Party. The same thing is they could get rid of dangerous aliens. What's an alien? Yeah, someone from outer space. And yeah, somebody who in the U.S. but not a citizen of the U.S. is an alien. I would love all of you to have a good weekend. Weekends are hard though, aren't they? Slides and pictures. I have to show you crap-based history, but oh, you see what I mean. But what party would be eventually would evolve around Hamilton's ideas?
Conservative.
So that's the essence of conservative economics today, but the name of the party. I've heard like 25 different top parties. Did anyone say Federalist and I did not hear? Thank you, Federalist. Did you say Federalist too?
Sure, I said it.
Yeah, I did. We all did. And what party was around Jefferson? Jefferson and Madison, Republicans. Now, you see the textbooks will be called Democratic Republicans. Have you noticed that? They didn't call themselves that. They called themselves Republicans. But future historians will start calling them Democratic Republicans to not confuse them with the Republicans that were formed in 1854 and in a lot of ways be the roots of the Republican Party today.
So the Democratic Republicans are
No, that differentiates them.
Oh, okay.
The Republicans of Jefferson would eventually evolve into the democracy than the Democratic Party. I know.
So the Republicans.
Yeah, it's the Federalists. It's not a straight line from Federalists to Republicans today, but it's closer. All right, so that's Hamiltonian economics, and now we have Washington's administration, and with that we have some pictures. So name one Elvis song.
Can't help falling in love.
Give us your best.
I was thinking of
Somewhere in my photos, there's a picture of me acting like Elvis in the Sun Record studios because they had the microphone for it. It's first recorded, and I was acting like Elvis.
So we got
Very bad. So with that, as you can see, I don't have the slides up. Yeah, well, actually, that's a Carl Perkins song, but Elvis sang it. This guy's saying it. That's Elvis. Johnny Cash. There he is.
This messenger was in love.
So the Federalist era. Before we've already talked about the Federalist era, so this said you've already written down. But who's this guy? Jefferson. Madison. Adams. That's obviously a portrait of Washington drawn from another portrait. And he didn't smile a lot for lots of reasons. He was aloof, his teeth hurt, but
what is he doing?
all right. So as you can tell from this, easy to follow. I know you want to see a diagram from 40 years ago about Hamilton's financial program. So this sums it up pretty good. See, they're doing something here, and then I guess giving money. Then we have a bank, and then it goes over to. Basically, I went up to see if he's coming down, and he said, I have to run and catch this girl because she ran over another girl. What? There was a hit and run. And
Wait, when? Where?
We like hit a
there was an
car.
accident in the parking lot, and Mr. Chauncey's got to take care of it.
No,
Is he
you're
hurt?
kidding.
No,
What? How badly
We
is he
just
hurt?
got him in here.
I don't think it's hurt bad, but I don't know what happened. It's pretty.
Well, it hits you.
I don't know all the details of what happened, so but the thing is he had to take off, and so we're gonna play it by ear.
Wow. I'm so excited. My Friday's ruined. Forever.
See, that's the thing about being an administrator. Stuff like that comes up and it's back easy. Mr. Chauncey's gonna be here, he just might be late.
I'm sad, Mr. Partridge.
Well, I blame you. Huh?
What do we do now?
What do we do now? I was gonna do that on Monday. What's we gonna do it Monday? No. Anything else? Peyton, what? By the way, Yankees played well last night. Anything else? Oh yeah. I was throwing fresh red pepper in my class.
That's a recipe for an accident. You gotta do it right.
I was throwing them at me and then they were throwing them back. It was fun in fifth period.
If you gotta do it right, use those things. Use
Use
those
Yeah, yeah, there's another chill that's even worse than all. All right, so Mr. Sean will be here as soon as he can. He is right now arresting people in the parking lot. And you, what's habeas corpus? What's habeas corpus? No. Even though trial is part of it. It's more than that. Got to take off the grizzly hat. And I like the grizzly. I don't like those old colors. They're old and then they're new again. I like the middle. I gotta admit, I grew up with the orange. What's habeas? What's habeas corpus? What'd you say?
Something about unlawful incarceration.
You're on the right track. Well, mean what? If you're arrested, what happens? Yeah.
Like necessarily for someone, not like that.
No, no. You want habeas corpus?
Wait, hold on, I have it in my notes.
No,
I
I
actually-
had to get your red thread to you. Wow.
Well, habeas corpus, that involves habeas
Hold
corpus.
on, hold on.
Habeas corpus is this. If you are arrested, you have to be charged with a crime. You can't just be held for no reason, and then there has to be a trial. So they just can't arrest you and put you away. Unless. Do you think there are exceptions to this?
Edward Snowden.
Well, actually, no, because he's now in Russia.
Yeah.
I have
He's back. He will be killed. He's charged with treason.
Now I know.
Okay.
Well, he's charged with about 20 minutes. They charge, most people charged for treason are not executed, virtually all. None of them. All right, so Mr. Johnson will be here in a couple minutes, but let's go ahead then. And on Monday, I'm going to tell you what's going to be on the test. On Tuesday, how about this Tuesday? I'll tell you what's going to be on the test. Monday, we'll have the test.
Yes.
That sounds like not a good plan.
What?
Not good.
That's not good enough. You want more?
Yeah.
All right, so I was going to finish up one thing because we saw Kent State yesterday, didn't we?
Yeah.
We saw a little bit of the anti-war moratorium. And so we're going to watch. This was not my plan. Because now we're out of whack, for which I blame.
The explicit words.
Yeah, the explicit language. That actually was pretty funny, the explicit language version, and I didn't. Why? You know what that is? Somebody made a big mistake at PBS. I don't think they gave it to me. I think everyone gets that free.
That should be.
All right, so let's go and watch. Everybody, take out your notes real quick and write down Mila.
I don't like